Joining us at Jonas Nursing and Veterans Healthcare for our 2019 webinar series. I'm Althea Hicks, the Grants and Programs Manager here, and please note that this webinar will be recorded. And we'd just like to acknowledge our founders, Donald and Barbara Jonas. Remember, our program works in partnership with many schools of nursing across the country to identify and invest in high potential doctoral nursing scholars. To give you a little background, we're the first and only privately funded program in the nation with a presence in all 50 states. And we're focused on the commitment to the nursing profession and veterans healthcare with over 1,200 scholars funded to date. Please follow us on our social media channels, specifically on Facebook and LinkedIn at Jonas Philanthropies and on Twitter at Jonas Impact. And also visit our website at www.jonasphilanthropies.org. You can also visit our webinars, our media libraries of recordings, as well as find out more about our upcoming events on our website as well. And in addition, please remember on today's webinar to use your chat function if you would like to submit a question. We will be able to monitor the chat feature and help moderate the questions as they come in. Today's webinar is entitled From Woodhull and Beyond, Maximizing Media Engagement for Nurses. We're happy to have Dr. Christy Westphalen with us, the co-author of Woodhull Revisited Studies, also a previous senior fellow with the Center for Health Policy and Media Engagement at the George Washington School of Nursing, and co-host and producer for Health Cetera Radio. Christy, Dr. Westphalen, thank you for joining us today. We will let her proceed with her presentation at this time. She has to share.
No, you're sharing.
I stopped. Wait. Christy, you can bring up your screen.
No, you're bringing it up.
Okay, I'll bring it up. Okay, can you see it now?
I see it and we're good to go. All right, welcome everyone to From Woodhull and Beyond, Maximizing Media Engagement for Nurses. Thanks for joining in today. I'm Christy Westphal. I'm your host and your guide through the content today. And a little bit about me. I graduated in 2004 with my BSN from Cal State LA, obtained my master's degree and became a pediatric nurse practitioner at UCLA. I finished my PhD from the Hans School of Nursing and Health Sciences at the University of San Diego in 2018. And currently, I'm a T32 postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Bioethics via the Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. You might be wondering, okay, with that history, how did she get involved in media engagement? Why am I giving this lecture? I'm gonna tell you. So it started out in 2016, and I'll tell you the story a little bit later, with Barbara Glickstein at a media training. And from there, I joined Health Cetera, both as a co-host and a producer. At the time, we were doing radio and podcast mix. From there, I became a senior fellow with the Center for Health Policy and Media Engagement at the George Washington University School of Nursing, and served as co-investigator and co-author for both of the Woodhull Revisited or Woodhull II studies. Currently, I serve as a consultant and member of the health team at Cleveland's NPR affiliate IdeaStream. So when I was a kid, there were three things I wanted to do when I grew up, and it was really hard to decide which one I had to do. A teacher, a reporter, and a nurse. I've been fortunate enough to be able to meet all three, and I just want to take a moment to thank the cadre of people who continue to support my journey moving forward. Much thanks to the Health Cetera team. You can see their picture in the middle and to the upper portion of this slide. Starting with the middle picture, Carol Myers, Liz Siegert, Diana Mason, Eve Adler, Joy Jacobson, and Barbara Glickstein. To my top right, Kenya Beard, and to the top left, M.K. Sertwick. Going to the bottom, you'll see a picture of my PhD chair in Compass, Eileen Fry-Bowers, and the bottom left, my amazing co-conspirators, Sunny Hallowell and Robin Cogan. Thank you to the Center for Health Policy and Media Engagement, the George Washington University School of Nursing, and Jonas Philanthropies. And thank you so much to Maggie Gelwitz and Althea Hicks over at Columbia, because it's your support that's really got this webinar from a no to a go. So I did ask, since this is a talk about engagement, to try to get an idea of who you are as the audience, as the listeners. So we asked a couple questions. We asked, how long have you been a nurse? What roles do you occupy? Are you familiar with Woodhull? And do you have any previous experience with media engagement? Here are the results. So there were 20 of you that answered the poll. I'm very, very grateful to y'all. Your range of years of experience as a nurse. So between 4 years and 45 years of experience, and you have collectively an average 23.5 years of experience as nurses. Many of you have not heard of the Woodhull studies, and of those who have, all of you had 40 years of experience. So it's good that you haven't heard of Woodhull, because we're gonna fix that today. Here's a word cloud that just depicts exactly what the roles you occupy as nurses, and I'm very excited to see the diversity within this slide. And then moving on to our next word cloud, this shows us what your previous experience with media engagement has been. And again, it was a pretty diverse sample. It looks like most of you have little or none, and there was a group of you that had some experience doing interviews, which is fantastic. So I think this is, again, hopefully going to be informative for you. Please, if you have questions, ask them as we go. And I mean, you've shared what you're interested as well in learning about. And I've tried to take what you've shared with me and incorporate that in. So again, I'll try to address as many topics as I can. However, time constraints of the webinar might impact my ability to do this. Ask questions in real time. I'll try to answer them. If not, please reach out. My information will be posted on the final slide of this presentation. And please email, please tweet. I'm out there, so are you. And moving forward. By the end of this presentation, you're going to be able to identify some of the common barriers involving nurses in media engagement. We're going to discuss key implications from the Woodhull studies on nursing in the media, differentiate among different types of journalism and media platforms, and finally, list multiple strategies, real ones, that you can use to maximize your own media engagement. So first of all, we need to talk about what the media is. We hear the term thrown around a lot, but it isn't always clear what it's referring to. Media is actually a plural for medium. It may include one or combinations of a message, a messenger, and the medium, and these can be very dynamic. The content is a combination of text, audio, graphics, or video, and it can also be multimedia, including a combination of any of those. And media can be further subdivided into print, broadcast, or internet or digital. So when I think about what the media is, I think collective communication with the means to reach and influence people. However, it's also important to remember that communication and journalism, they're not the same thing. Where exactly might journalism fit into all of this? The primary purpose of journalism is to provide citizens with the information that they need to be free and self-governing. So the function of news, it's to signal an event. The function of journalistic truth is interesting. It's different than what we might consider in terms of scientific truth or what we might consider in terms of nursing truth. Journalistic truth focuses on how to shed light on facts, explore connections among those facts, and forge a construct of reality that is accessible and actionable to the public. So I'm going to take a moment just to unpack a little bit about journalism. And I think these two quotes sum it up nicely. So why does the media need nurses, and why do nurses need the media? The first quote reflects a journalistic perspective. The people are cardboard. Their names and faces fit into a journalistic template. The quotes are often used as tools instead of being cast as part of a deeper conversation between the subjects of the story and the audience. So as I was running through my Twitter feed the other day, I came across this perfect tweet from Dr. Rachel Walker. She just sums it up so succinctly. She said, "One of the things I love about being a nurse scientist," and I think this is applicable not just for nurse scientists, but all nurses and especially nurses in media. One of the things I love about being a nurse scientist is that everything nurses do starts with a person. Who is a person? Not a patient, not a disease, not a label. And it's person directed in the sense that we need to understand, what does health look like where you are right now? Nurses are the largest group of health professionals. There are 3.5 million RNs in the United States to the 800,000 physicians. That leaves at about a 3-to-1 ratio, and it's interesting. Often nursing is considered the heartbeat or the pulse of society. If nursing is the pulse, journalism's the mirror. Nurses continue to struggle with lack in visibility and voice, despite our numbers. And if nurses are not part of the conversation about who we are and what we're going to do, someone else is going to speak for us. So there are a lot of challenges in terms of media engagement, and I have this super embarrassing picture up here for a reason. This is a picture of my very first media interaction. I was pretty terrified. I was given a few minutes of warning that I'd be stepping in for my boss. He was a pediatric trauma surgeon and he was in the OR. And I would be presenting and representing Children's Hospital Los Angeles at a press conference on bicycle safety for children. I had confidence in my knowledge as a pediatric nurse practitioner, but I had no previous media training. And it was a little nerve-wracking. Interestingly enough, in the survey, most of what you shared in your word cloud results reflect many of the thoughts that I'd had right before I had to go on camera. And so here it is. Your barriers to media engagement via word cloud. And it looks like the majority of you, misinterpretation was the biggest concern. Also with taken out of context, which I think runs within a similar theme to that. And kind of the third biggest one up there looks like damaged professional image followed by performance anxiety. I get it. I felt all of those things. And here are a few other barriers to consider. I'm too shy. I don't do well under pressure. I am not an eloquent speaker. I don't have anything to say. I'm not the best expert. I think technology hates me. Media involvement places my job at risk. Media endeavors are a waste of my time because media does not equal academia, and I don't know the right people. I think one of the frustrating barriers that's come up a lot in just my circles have been, well, I'm just a nurse. What do I have to say? A lot. So I'm pleased to share this forthcoming comic by M.K. Serwick that will soon be published in the Shameless Feminist edition of WW3 Illustrated. In 1997, journalist and founder of USA Today, Nancy Woodhull, was concerned about representations of women in the media. She decided to study nurses. As a profession, nurses are 90% female and the largest group of health professionals in the country. Woodhull and her team looked at the use of nurses as sources in stories about healthcare. They found that nurses were used as sources in less than 4% of health-related stories in newspapers, weeklies, and healthcare trade publications. Although a patient realizes quickly how important nurses are, the media continues to ignore their role. And here we are, 20 years later with the Woodhull 2 study. It was 3 phases. The first phase dealt with replication of the original Woodhull study. Phase 2 is a qualitative investigation of journalist perceptions on barriers and facilitators involved in using nurses as sources. And phase 3 was an analysis of how schools of nursing use social media. So on May 18th, 2018, members of the research team presented the findings of our Woodhull 2 study for Nurses Week at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. And spoiler alert, has anything changed from Woodhull 1 to Woodhull 2? Yeah, not so much. The original 1997 Woodhull study involved an analysis of 2,234 articles, whereas the 217 version, Woodhull 2, involved 573 articles. Findings from the original Woodhull study demonstrated that only 4% of newspapers and 1% of the weeklies featured quotes by nurse sources. This did not change significantly in the Woodhull 2 study, which revealed that quotes by nurse sources were featured in 2% of the newspaper articles and 1% of the weeklies. Some of the main themes that we found from the nurse source quotes within the Woodhull 2 study involved quality, the nursing profession, and labor and workforce. We also conducted a photo image content analysis in the Woodhull 2 study and found that men occupied 49% of the photos and images within our randomized sample. 34% of the photos featured policymakers, 25% were pictures of families and patients, 15% were unidentified clinicians in white coats, and nurses, we were only identified in 4% of the photographs and the images. Phase 2 was the qualitative investigation of journalist perceptions on barriers and facilitators involved in using nurses as sources. We conducted a semi-structured phone interviews with key informants that lasted approximately 30 to 60 minutes. And we recruited additional participants through a snowballing technique to ultimately recruit 10 journalists. We had 8 females, 2 males, and we learned a lot. Transcripts were analyzed individually by members of our research team, and then we all came together until we reached a consensus on the content. And during the next couple of slides, I'm going to present our key findings, and I apologize for reading the quotes to you, but I do think that these quotes are salient and important, and I wanted to share them with you today. So first, biases about women, nurses, and positions of power in the healthcare system can get in the way of journalists using diverse sources in health reporting. Second, nurses offer value perspectives in health reporting. So this is going to sound weird, but my impression is that sometimes that the concept of what the patient needs to know about medicine and what the patient needs to experience about their own health can sometimes be a little different depending on who you speak to. I can find that the perspective that you'll get from a nurse is much more to sort of get a sense of what the patient's unique circumstances and cultural beliefs are, and what their perspective is about what they want to get out of the medical experience, versus sometimes more of a prescribed experience from a doctor. Third, the different roles in education of nurses can be challenging for non-nurses to understand. We do have a little bit of alphabet soup in our profession. So one journalist shared that they found in conversations with sources, but also just casual conversations, if I happen to be speaking to a nurse, if I don't understand what is the difference between their title and qualifications versus somebody else in the broader nursing field, it seems that like there might be some sort of offense, or that they might be something that I've said that wasn't right. It made me feel the conversation just shut down a little bit. Fourth, nurses can be difficult for healthcare reporters to locate or interview. Fifth, nurses are not often offered as sources from universities or healthcare organizations. This is probably not a surprise to most of you. And this journalist shared, I've observed in recent years the sort of viral way the use of digital environment based on Twitter, the internet, make it necessary for everyone to cultivate a personal brand. I've certainly observed at the organizational level, hospitals, clinics, academic medical centers, and individual positions may choose to cultivate a sort of rock star personal brand. And each of them, I think, has an interest in presenting rock star docs to the public in whatever way they can. So I think that speaks a little bit to the authenticity piece, right? If everything is a rock star doc and pre-prescribed, a piece of the authenticity may be lost within the branding. Sixth, newsroom and or editorial biases may impact using nurses as sources. I've worked in some newsrooms where there's just generally not a lot of women around, and there's not a lot of understanding of what role nurses play in medicine generally. There's also a lot of ignorance about a lot of issues in healthcare. I've definitely had people in that newsroom just say, what, was I unable anywhere in America to find a doctor? And it just depends on the study, but I definitely have found in some newsroom situations, they just don't get it. Seventh, nurses and nursing organizations are not strategic about effective media engagement. I know what professional associations to contact to find a physician who can talk about that. And with nurses, I just don't know. So moving on to yet another amazing comic by M.K. Serwick. For the past 16 years, Gallup polling shows that nurses are the most trusted profession. And yet, we nurses remain invisible in health stories. Journalists don't fully understand the range of nurses' roles, works, and education. They may value diverse sources, but often don't know how to find nurses to interview, and they don't have time to track them down these days. And it's not just journalists. Researchers also ignore nurses. I was looking into an assertion I'd read that because of what they know and have seen, healthcare providers die better than other people. Turns out the data does not back this up. In a study of nearly 10,000 doctors in 2016, they used slightly more intensive care days than the general population. As for nurses who are at the bedside 24/7, no one has asked. So what's to be done about this disregard for expertise of nurses? Well, there are a few things that might help. Media, reach out to a nurse as a source in your health stories, and nurses, make your experience known. Sometimes it seems that nurses perceive media engagement similarly to a trauma bay. As an ER nurse and nurse practitioner, I find my mind gravitating back to the ER often. So again, here's the trauma bay, anticipating the worst, just like media engagement could be, right? The trauma bay can sometimes be a bit messy. However, it's also dynamic, flexible, full of teamwork, and well-equipped to save lives. Here's the thing. High stakes environments can work out well, given resources, planning, and resolve. Media engagement may seem messy, but there are lots of tricks, tools, and teams that can help transform your stress to success. All right, so now we're going to move the discussion beyond the Woodhull studies and into strategies to maximize media engagement. Classified media engagement into a framework based upon the exchange between the three principles of media and the audience. So your three principles are your message, messenger, and the medium. We'll begin by exploring the message. We got to set the stage to engage, and that's your message. So just like in research, good media messaging takes planning. People do not just get on camera or go into an interview unprepared. There's a large amount of work that goes into being effective in terms of getting your messaging right. So as you're starting to craft your strategy, think about, what are you trying to say? How do you want to frame it? Identify, explore, and refine it. You're going to start with your narrative, your story, but eventually you're going to need to titrate it down, interweave your facts in there, and make it clear and concise. Fourth, you got to plan your pitch and plan for your platform, and we'll talk more about platforms in a bit. And then dissemination. It's very important to know the audience that you're reaching because you want your frame to match your audience. I have a silly tradition with nurse media maven Barbara Glickstein that I just love. You notice the picture of us wearing glasses, and we've actually swapped glasses. Whenever our paths cross, we always swap glasses, and it's kind of symbolic in a way, not just in a Depeche Mode kind of song way. But first of all, it reminds me of how much we can learn by trying to understand the world from diverse perspectives, that it's really important to reflect on the Life Lab with friends, mentors, lots of different people. And then framing really does matter, especially at the intersection of health, media, and policy. So here are some ways to just think about how to frame your message and how to tell your story. So the big picture is a type of narrative or story where you're examining issues or trends. If you want to go for an explanatory frame, you're going to give a story and paint a picture of how the world works. If you're going to do a profile piece, you become the tour guide. You can do stories that amplify voices, or you can choose to do stories with more of a descriptive background, which involve vivid recreations. Investigative framing often deals with accountability and wrongdoing. Narratives tell the story from the beginning to the middle through the end. And let's not forget the data. Data visualization provides an awesome way to tell stories with numbers. You want to craft concise messaging. So again, once you get your narrative and your story down, you got to figure out a way to make it fit into quick sound bites so that way the media can effectively disseminate it. So you want to ask, what's my purpose? Who's my audience? And what do I want them to do? You want to keep it simple. Select 3 key message points. Make sure that they're concise, they're clear, use simple language. There you go. Include your who, what, when, where, why, and how. And again, your audience is key. What are you trying to do? Are you influencing policy? Are you educating? And also important to consider, are you representing yourself, an academic setting, or a professional or other healthcare organization? A few tips for voicing work. You may have already noticed, but I talk really fast. And coffee in the mix makes me talk even faster. Regardless of speaking in regular conversations, leading a class, giving a research presentation, or recording a radio segment, I constantly have to work to keep my speed in check. One of our participants, she had emailed in that she was concerned about her bobbing head as part of one of the barriers to media engagement. For me, it's always been the need for speed or combating against it. So much thanks to ACE reporter Liz Siegert, who gave me the best advice I've ever received on how to really deal with that need for speed. And that's read it and breathe it like a musical score. And I still do that today. Even when I'm giving presentations, I'll actually make musical notations on my script to help me visualize it. It's a great hint, especially if you have a background in music. So other tips for voicing work. You want to make sure you sound like yourself. It doesn't sound right if you're just reading off of a script and you don't include ups and downs and changes in your voice. You want it to sound like you. People are listening because they want to hear you. Pay attention to the way you ask questions and be sensitive about that. Also helpful when I first got started, I was nervous, and it takes a while to get used to hearing your own voice, but find voices that you admire. Find your voice crushes, listen to them, and follow the patterns of what they do. That can sometimes help you to get your own groove going. Writing like you talk and talking while you write. This is something that I tell students to do a lot because the way that we write academically is very different than the way that we would speak or write maybe as a journal article or a newspaper article. So make sure that you practice multiple ways of disseminating your messaging, both when you're writing your academic papers, but also trying to translate them in plain day English and also making your quick, concise messaging news bites as you go. So that way you're working together through everything as you do your work. Things will sound different when you speak them than when you say them. The mouth edit is also very important in terms of do the words fit in your mouth, and just remember, it's not Top Gun. There's no need for speed. Here are a couple resources that you can use if you'd like to go ahead and get more messaging experience. There's Barbara Glickstein strategies. There are opportunities through the George Washington University Center for Health Policy and Media Engagement. The Opinion Editorial Project is a fantastic resource to write to change the world and really network and learn how to do your op-eds in effective ways. And then lastly, the Women's Media Center also has some fantastic resources for getting involved. So moving into the second aspect of the media engagement framework, it's the messenger. That's you. To start, what exactly did we learn from our qualitative delve into journalists' experiences in using nurses as sources in health stories? Well, here it is. Make real connections. The journalist said, contact us to get a cup of coffee. Try it. Champion your research ideas and reach out. Email journalists, pitch your stories to them. Invite them to professional conferences or meetings. Tell them about your research. Clearly articulate your title and explain your alphabet soup. Your alphabet soup, again, it's sometimes very confusing for people who aren't nurses to know who we are. It's an opportunity to educate and share what we do. So really important, just assume nobody knows what all your initials are and really speak to what they are and what they represent and the work that you do. Be available. Make sure you follow up. Word on the street from a couple reporters that I know have been that they've reached out to some nurse resources or sources. However, they had poor follow-up. The deadlines are real in journalism, and we need to be respectful for that and try to help journalists do their job so that way we can be involved. Reporters don't always have the last say on edits. I think this is a really important one because if there are errors that you detect in a piece that you're involved in, for example, one time I wrote an opinion editorial and they left my PhD and they left my PNP, and first a nurse, always a nurse. I'm proud of my RN. But at the same time, I was responding to a physician who had written a particularly nasty piece on nurse practitioner practice, and it was important as my identity as a PhD prepared nurse and as a nurse practitioner to have that depicted. So stand up for yourself. If you are a source, recommend other nurses for sources. And again, if you are talking to a journalist, always have a pitch for them. Always have something else to suggest. Developing media competencies is a good idea. And I can see a question in the chat box that, can you share more about the Opinion Editorial Project? And yeah, I'd be happy to. So it's an organization that actually does trainings for individuals as well as through universities. So if you're a student, both faculty members and students can benefit from this experience. They have different types of workshops of different lengths. The target audience is anyone that's interested that has a message to share, and check out their website. They could be doing a workshop in your city, or you might be able to organize one for a negotiable price at your university. And then my last nurses as sources finding from the Woodhull study is, again, we need to do outreach to universities, healthcare organizations, and professional organizations. They need to know that they can offer more than rockstar docs. They can actually refer nurses. So I also decided to, being part of NPR Idea Stream, to poll my fellow reporters and journalists to see if they had some additional advice for us, and they did. So thank you so much to Marlene, Laura, and Anne. So Marlene is our lead reporter, and you can see a picture of her doing an interview above. She says, engage with the PR people at your institutions. They're the gatekeepers who guide the media, which reflects what we found in the Woodhull too. From Laura, who is our audience experience producer and additionally a health reporter. She says, be willing to talk about your story in an unguarded way. And I think that leads back to the authenticity piece, because if you're just going off of bullet points on a note card that your organization fed to you, the essence of what your story is and what you as a nurse bring is lost. And that's worth fighting for. Laura also says, please bring a clear picture, more than just the bullet points. Cultivate relationships with your journalists. She actually really appreciates having regular contact with people in the community about her reporting. And I think this also is true in the vein of policymaking and being engaged with our legislators, right? In order to truly have meaningful connection and engagement, there has to be a little bit of investment in terms of building a relationship. So I asked Anne, our managing producer, what makes a so-so source from an excellent source? So she says, subject matter expertise really matters a lot. Speak to what you know and speak to the research. Ease of scheduling and access, hitting the deadline is critical, which also showed up as a theme within our Woodhull 2 results. The willingness to act as a connector to communities, and I think this is also true, a connector to each other. The ability to cut through jargon and express points in plain language. I mean, every discipline has their set of jargon and the words that they use, and navigating through that can be really difficult for somebody who isn't familiar. So make sure that when you're speaking to journalists that you really unpack things in a way that they can understand, not using some of our nursing jargon or, PRN, some of the medical abbreviations that they may or may not be familiar with. And then understand that the relationship with the journalist, really important. Nothing is off the record unless it's specified in agreement. And I've had this come up when I've done interviews where people want to talk off the record, but that also has to do a little bit with the trustworthiness and the transparency of our reporting. So I think when you sacrifice identity, you lose a little bit of the authenticity and the truth to it. But I think there's also being the risks that we have in terms of employment, a slippery, kind of slope balance to consider there. But remember, nothing is off the record unless explicitly agreed on in advance, and sources are not typically given advance copies of edits. This isn't like a peer review for a journal where you get feedback and you put it in. You give your information and then the journalists work with it. They present it to the editor, but it is not common practice for edits to be shared. So pitch your ideas, it works. Here's a recent example of how nurse scientist Kirsten Mangus applied her expertise, identified a gap, and successfully pitched a story to NPR. Google her story, check out her interview. So it's when a nurse is prosecuted for a fatal medical mistake. Does it make medicine safer? She did great, and I know you can too. So what does it mean to make your expertise known? Barbara makes this crystal clear in this amazing comic where she says, toot your own horn. But isn't it rude and annoying to brag? Well, if you do it in the right venue and bring others along with you, it's never bragging. It's how we get our voices heard. On social media, letters to the editor, more social media, news conferences, and interviews. So we've discussed the message, we've discussed you as the messenger, and now we're going to focus a little bit on the medium. So yes, nurses can be media shakers and media makers. There are really lots of ways to work at engagement, and I love this slide because it gives you a really nice, diverse group of types of social media things that you can use to really work with different types of audiences. But despite all those ways to engage, it's really important to set your strategy, but also be realistic with yourself. It's important to know your options. Know your options and know yourself. For example, my own personal media bias gravitates towards audio broadcasting, such as radio or digital media, such as podcasting. I tend to avoid television like the plague. I'm cool with that. Again, and it's all right. Not everybody needs to be on television. Not everybody needs to be a radio source. There are plenty of ways to write or interact on other platforms that may be just as effective for you, if not more so, because you're more comfortable with it. So what is your preferred platform? And I am partial to platform 9 3/4. But you'll see on this list, we have a couple that are in black and a couple in red. Again, time constraints, there could be a whole textbook on all this content, but I've just chosen to pull out a few of the key things to consider. So writing an opinion editorial is a great way. Using Twitter, starting a blog, hosting a podcast or a TV show or a radio show, hosting a YouTube show or a video log or vlog. When media is wrong about you or about nursing, call them out on it. consider making a documentary or consulting for one. You can produce public service announcements, which can be done with students as student projects. You can do a side hustle as a journalist, either through print, broadcast, or digital forms, and consultation for innovation. So it looks like we have some amazing comments that I'm just going to take a moment to respond to. Looks like there is a comment about a forum discussion initiated at the ANA, increasing visibility of nurses in the media. Excellent dialogue with great suggestions, so we'll have to take a look at that. And then another awesome comment based on the ANA dialogue forum of increasing visibility and nurses in the media, and challenging pre-licensure BSN students to engage by writing a letter to the editor. So awesome, Stacy, thanks for sharing. And also thank you, Mary Lee, for your comment. So, all right, fantastic. We'll continue to move forth off of platform in 3/4 onto Thomas Jefferson. So the New York Post was started by Alexander Hamilton in 1801 as a primary platform to disseminate the views of the Federalist Party, which gives kind of important context to why Thomas Jefferson once said that newspaper articles could be classified as truths, probabilities, possibilities, or lies. So that moves us into opinion editorials. Historically, the line between news reporting and opinion journalism has been a bit hazy. In the 1800s, newspapers were politically driven and very polarized. It wasn't until 1841 when Horace Greeley founded the New York Tribune. He was the first one that decided that both reporting the news and opinion writing needed to have their own dedicated spaces within newspapers. That model still continues today. So journalism opinion is not so much about reporting, but more so about making sense of the world. And it's okay. Op-eds, they explore ideas. They aren't necessarily meant to be balanced. And I think of op-eds as opportunities. It's important to consider reach with op-eds because often the audience that you're reaching may already be drinking the same Kool-Aid that you do. So just an important consideration. But again, if you check out the op-ed project online, they can give additional resources. And many of the seasoned, experienced nursing journal editors and writers and nurse scientists have partaken in op-eds. If you have access to them at your university, if you're students, or if you're new faculty and you just want practice, the best way to get better at op-eds is actually doing it. So here are some considerations for crafting your opinion editorials. Establishing credibility to your cause is key, all right? Both for who you are and why you are the person writing this, as well as why it's a problem. So clearly identify the scope of the problem or the issue. Present convincing evidence. This evidence needs to include both powerful narrative and it needs numbers. It needs multiple types of data. Make sure that you identify all the pertinent stakeholders. Who's in, who's not, and why. And disparities, diversity, and ethical dilemmas also really key to tease out. Is this starting to sound like a policy analysis to you? Well, it should. Opinion editorials, while opinion, still need to be evidence-based and still also need to be thoughtfully constructed, not just a reactive response or an inflammatory response to a certain issue or policy change. So you need to offer policy-based solutions. So where must the changes be made? What actions must happen for change to occur? And who exactly has the power to make change happen? Lastly, and I think this is also one of the most important things, is unintended consequences, as well as addressing the consequences of inaction. So moving into, I'm loving all this chat I see on the side here. Good job engaging, everybody. So we're going to move into a little bit of social media. Again, this is a whole textbook. We're not going to have time to go through all of it, but I'm going to kind of give you little hints to navigate through. Also, I'm not going to tell you how to sign up for a Twitter account. Lots of amazing tutorials on how to do that. But instead, we're just going to, again, go through some examples, starting with, well, what exactly is social media? Forms of electronic communication, such as websites for social networking or blogging, through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, and other type of content. So yes, Twitterations, Twitter considerations. Twitter handles and hashtags, they're key. You got to be very, very, very strategic with them. When I first joined Twitter, I actually used it because I was interested in policy. I found that if I followed California legislators while they were voting or discussing certain things, I could find out what went through the House or the Senate faster than the news could report it. So I was very careful to specifically decide who to follow because I didn't want it to be an advertising stream and I didn't want it to be a time suck. You too can do that. You have the ability to select the people and the content that you want to follow. You also have the ability to block followers who may be unsavory in terms of interacting with you, which Twitter bullying, never okay. Things to consider about tweets, you have 280 characters per tweet. So I think it's a good habit as you're putting your research together to consider as you're writing up your study and you're getting it ready for, again, writing it as a research report, writing it as a press release, writing it maybe as an opinion editorial. Also consider writing it in as a tweet. Make sure in your research that you include your Twitter handles and you include hashtags so that way people can find your work. Because academic Twitter, it's a thing. Twitter has really evolved and done an amazing job of connecting academics from all sorts of professions. I mean, it's amazing how we're able to attend virtually so many conferences because the Twitterverse has expanded to allow people to actually learn from Twitter. It's not just about people posting their opinions, but by sharing their research, sharing slides, we're actually able to move information in a way that's never done before. So playing with Twitter analytics is also something that can be kind of fun. And that leads us to the third part of the Woodhull study, which deals with tweets. So inward versus outward bound or inward versus outward facing is a really important consideration. Are we just tweeting to each other or are we actually getting reach? So inward refers to the interaction within the nursing community, whereas outward refers to interaction outside of the nursing community. So during Woodhull, Dr. Cam Aquaviva analyzed 3,200 tweets. So of the top 50 schools of nursing, 47 had Twitter accounts. Of those 47 schools, 101,544 followers. From that, there were about 58,000 unduplicated Twitter accounts. Basically, the results showed that only 20% of the tweets were outward facing, which means our schools of nursing have not been reaching outside the bounds of nursing, which in today's day and age with team science, with interdisciplinary work, I mean, we really need to be making use of hashtags and mindful strategic Twitter in order to expand. So fun bringing opinion editorials and Twitter together. There was a recently published opinion editorial written in nursing ethics, and it was to tweet or not to tweet, an argument for Twitter presence in the Twitter sphere. So they make a really good argument. So I'm excited to share these results kind of hot off the press. So number one, networking. Twitter is fantastic for networking from person to profession to population and in between. Great for advocacy efforts. Fantastic for knowledge translation, sharing your articles, sharing other people's articles, sharing your research information and resources, and Twitter's also being used now as research intervention. So check out their article. Another really important social media is using blogs or blogging. And blogging is not something that's necessarily new on the block, near as Twitter. I mean, the first blog was created in 1994, and the term blog originated in 1999. So what exactly is it? It's a website. It contains online personal reflections, comments, and often hyperlinks, videos, photographs, and other things that are provided by the writer. So The Relentless School Nurse is an award-winning blog by school nurse Robin Cogan. She uses her platform to inspire nurses to be relentless and become change agents in nursing. Their Nursology blog, different type of blog, encourages the development of nursing knowledge, discusses ideas that are critical to nursing, honors different types of nurses, shares inspiring stories. And then Health Cetera has a media lab where we continue to feature blogs from regular contributors and guest bloggers at the intersection of health, media, and policy. So blogging is something that you can sign up and anyone can get it going. It's a great way to share your stories. And I mean, I think that what the social media platforms have in common is that it really truly is about cultivating your audience and connecting with them, which may be different than other print or other types of media. So moving on to audio broadcasting, radio, and podcasting. So a podcast, again, not new, just like Twitter and blogs, been around a while, but there's a lot of opportunities for innovation and for nurse voices to be showcased. The word podcast actually came from a combination of iPod and broadcast, which turned into podcast or pod. They're digital media files that can be listened to on computers or other portable audio devices. Think audio on demand. They're disseminated by downloading or streaming, and most radio today is also available as a podcast. When we did our Health Cetera segments, we did radio, but at the same time we recorded it, so it could also be used as a podcast. I think that one of the big differences between radio and podcasting is radio is often live, and audiences tend to be a little more forgiving of background noise or imperfections. Podcasting, a little bit more produced, a little bit cleaner. So yeah, podcast movement, it's been underway for some time. And podcasts are easy to make, easy to access, and they're relatively cost effective when compared to doing a radio or a television show. There are multiple resources for learning how to produce your own podcast, and one of them is the annual Work It Women's Festival. So the challenge in podcast, again, involves reach. You got to know your audience and you got to know your niche. Few of my favorites are What the Health, Revisionist History, Freakonomics, Nurses and Hypochondriacs, M-, Serial, Health Connections, and yes, bias towards Health Cetera. Few considerations in the age of social media, because this is different than print media has ever been, or television or broadcasting. Makes me think of the difference between the Saturday specials we used to watch on TV when we were kids and now Netflix, where you can stream everything at once. So our digital social media age is characterized by three things. First, speed. Second, there's a predilection for commentary and quibble. There may also be a little bit of that in terms of political involvement, but I mean, because information can move so fast and everyone can have a say, that again has kind of created an interesting environment for discourse. Third, again, that open network. We do have more signals, but we also have more noise. And we think about this in research all the time in an evidence-based practice, right? I mean, we have this paradox surrounding the sheer amount of information and our ability to effectively sort it. And not to go all Stan Lee on you all, but with great power does come great responsibility, and the web can sometimes make things sticky. So some of the risks, and I'm not a big risk person, I much more tend to like to go with the positive health than the negative health, but I do think that it's important to know your institutional policies on social media use, follow them. A quick disclosure statement on your Twitter or other social media accounts, such as views or my own, can be a helpful protection. Use common sense with the HIPAA stuff. If the alarm bells go off, if it seems like you're saying something you shouldn't, you probably should not. Use the strategies that work the best for you. Again, I'm a radio girl. TV, never been my cup of tea, but that's okay. You have to know what you're comfortable with and go with it. And then lastly, and most important, ask yourself, are the risks of engaging with the media more concerning to you than the price of staying silent? My greatest personal discoveries after my involvement in the Woodhull studies were that I wanted to learn more about the intersection between health media and public health, and to gain skills to produce media that will amplify visibility and voice for our patients and our profession. So upon moving to Cleveland for my postdoc, I pitched an innovative idea to NPR at Cleveland, Idea Stream, walked through the green doors, which you can see right there, and the adventures continue. And just to give you some real life examples about innovative ways that you can be involved in media, I'm going to share some of my adventures with NPR. So we do a lot with experimentation in health journalism, human-centered design, and community engagement. The things that I've been working on with the team are, is there a sweet spot to be found at the intersection of health journalism and public health? How can health reporting or health journalism impact our community and foster a culture of health within low-resource communities in Cleveland, particularly African-American communities? And how do we measure this in meaningful ways? So our first project was the Speak the Unspoken project. African Americans in Cleveland and nationwide experience more gun violence and more infant loss than white counterparts. All too often, their grief is borne alone and in silence. This series gives voice to the stories of those who are ready to talk. Not only were we able to share some powerful stories surrounding grief and loss in our local community, we were also able to highlight the complexity of grief and that recovery should not be lumped into a one-size-fits-all model. We were able to present this work across Cleveland at community watch parties, as well as with the Cuyahoga Department of Health. Another project that we did was a response to Euphoria. When this show came out, we had a lot of freakouts in our community about, oh my gosh, what are our adolescents doing? Are they getting into trouble? And we wanted to respond to that in a way that was evidence-based, but was also community engaged. So we created a community forum. And within it, we invited local experts to reflect on local results from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, to debunk myths, unpack the evidence, and interact with the audience to explore solutions from within our community. It was a full house. One third kind of innovative way to bring nursing evidence and research together is a project that I'm producing. It is a participatory child health education podcast in partnership with NPR Idea Stream, Marion Sterling Elementary School, and Mrs. Simpson's 5th grade class. So our premise is to incorporate a framework grounded in community-based participatory principles, evidence-based health education content, and Ohio's ELA, which stands for English Language Arts Standards, in a podcasting health education project in which we're going to amplify students' health knowledge while also fostering presentation literacy skills. It will also tell you Ohio is the only state in the United States that does not have core curriculum for health education. And we're also going to be doing a journalistic piece side by side with a podcasting piece to see what we can do in terms of maximizing the capacity of health education in local elementary schools. So again, these are just some real life examples that you can really get creative. And I'm just so excited that you all are here and that we're talking about this, because in order to move forward and amplify the voice of nursing, we need to get creative, we need to get visible, and we need to get loud. So during this presentation, we've explored key concepts involving media engagement, and here's kind of the model in the making. The media is a collective communication with the means to influence society, and it includes the message, the messenger, which is you, and the medium. We have this interaction with the audience, and that's who you're trying to reach from person to population, and it may be all of those all at the same time. And then you have your media engagement, which I define as a dynamic process that involves multi-level exchanges between the audience and the media, and involves measuring change in audience awareness, knowledge, perception, and participation. So you may see a Mr. Slinky up there, and yes, there are definitely systems thinking applications here, and I have that Slinky up there purposefully as my nod to Donella Meadows. So we know that research shows that nurses are underrepresented in the media, and there are barriers to nurses engaging with the media. However, there are strategies to help us move beyond this. Transformative ones. And I have Mr. Potato Head up there because he's able to transform his appearance at will, which is pretty cool, and get creative. So first of all, and we've already talked about a lot of these, but this is kind of a sum up. So yes, you all can be media shakers, but if you don't want to be a source, you can be a media maker. So yes, interviews are fantastic. Continue to do them. Continue to encourage your colleagues to do them and mentor your students to be part of them. Television, radio, podcasting, social media interviews. Researchers, use social media to disseminate your research. It is not watering down your work. It's expanding your reach into other disciplines, which we need to get nursing research out there. Write a lot every day. Write print, write digital, write op-eds, write letters to the editor. Just write. It's another way to get your voice, our patients' voices heard. Draw. I've been fortunate enough to share MK's amazing work, but cartoons, graphic medicine, amazing ways to do media messaging. So if you've got skills in that department, use them. So one of the things that I find in my patient practice is that all my kids, when I ask them what they want to be when they grow up, is, well, I want to be a YouTuber. So in kind of a Twitter conversation with Rodrigo Cardoso, we both had been kind of scamming YouTube or skimming YouTube to see what we could find in terms of high quality nurse media that was on YouTube, because the kids are all on it. Media, like social YouTube influencers, very in right now, but it's a completely underutilized environment for health education, health content, and media interaction. So for those of you listening that are looking for a project, consider YouTube. You are needed. Vlogging is video logging. Also an opportunity, more of an interview. You could be a host or you could be a source. Teach presentation literacy to your students. So this is media skills. This is realizing that yes, you have to be able to use your words as a researcher, but if your research can't translate to the everyday public, is it doing what you want it to do? And considering, again, when you write, I always do this. Write your research article, write it in plain language, and then write it in bullet points and media messaging. Do it all at the same time, make your dissemination plan, and get it ready to go. Make sure that you can also have your students produce public service announcements or podcasts as projects. Doing those actually does good for the community because we're educating each other and we're educating ourselves. You can do consulting for short films or consult for a documentary. Barbara Glickstein, she is a nurse consultant with Carolyn Jones Productions for The American Nurse and the documentaries on nursing moving forward. There are many opportunities to reach out in that way. You just got to look for them. Collaborating or consulting with local media makers, which is like me. I feel very drawn to get myself into a position where I can help produce your media and the media that our patients are interested in and get that out there. Gaming or virtual reality represents another really innovative way to kind of engage with younger students and gamers. And then lastly, be available. Universities, healthcare professional organizations, again, nurses are the largest body of healthcare clinicians. So we need to do a better job and not just wait for them to come to us, but we need to go to them. So moving forward, what strategies do you plan to use to maximize your media engagement? It is a talk on engagement. So now I'm gonna ask a huge favor of all of you that are tuning in today. I wanna know, what are you going to do now that you've learned a little bit about some of the findings of the Woodhull studies and some of the strategies that I've shared? So get your cell phones out, all right? Type in 22333 and you're going to text KRISTIWESTPH817 to that number. That's going to register you. So again, take your cell phones out. This is all about engagement. So please consider participating. It's going to be cool. We actually have a live word cloud that we're going to collect all of your answers. So after you've registered, you'll get a text back to your phone that says that you're registered. And then you can text as many responses as you want from any of the content that we've talked about today. So we can make this word cloud, again, it'll reflect what your plans are. I'm very excited to learn, what you want to do moving forward. And yes, so I'm going to try to stall a little bit so everyone can participate. And also, don't worry, after this presentation is done, you'll text leave in capital letters and it will not continue to harass you, I promise. Social media, it's your friend. This is a way to engage. All right, so moving on to our next slide. One more idea. We can also take a page or two from the founders of Ladies Do Comics, Sarah Lightman and Nicola Straighton. Panels of comic creators so often were all men, so Sarah and Nicola started raising their hands at the Q&As and asking them, where are the women? This simple strategy is effective and it's highly adaptable. Where are the nurses? So this is really putting myself out there. It's scary, you know? Well, no more scary than anything else you did for the first time, especially as a nurse. How'd you face that? Well, as one of my favorite nursing school professors would say, you're scared and that's okay, but you do it anyway. And that applies to all of the work that we do as women, don't you think? So again, I'm hoping all of you are texting into the word cloud. So 22333 to participate in the poll. You can participate as many times as you want. I mean, using shorter words is better for the way that the word cloud will populate in. But yes, please send us your comments. And then moving on to the next slide. How does the future of nursing look to you? What do you have to say about it? And how will you say it? Use your voice to amplify nursing. Think beyond the possible. And as Wanda Montalvo said to me recently in a Twitter email interaction, be bold. So not only do we need to have people ask of nurses, we need nursing to also push back and show what we can do. So hopefully the word cloud is populating in. We're going to now switch screens to actually show you what your collective plan for media engagement looks like after this presentation. Oh, exciting stuff. It's getting bigger. All right, so it looks like everyone's feeling very motivated to write opinion editorials. I'm so sorry I didn't spend more time speaking on that today. Twitter, I like it. I hope to see all of you on Twitter very soon. I love that I see writing up there. Faculty, that's right. Faculty, you are shaping the new nurses of the future. We have to debunk that engaging in the media is a bad thing. One of the superpowers of nursing is our ability to connect to our patients. As technology continues, connection is still there. It's just changed a little bit. So we need to find new innovative ways to help our new nurses connect to our patients. So, oh, it's still populating. You guys are awesome. You are awesome, engaged audience. So I love it. I see some hashtags up there. I love it. Tweet RN, Nurse Twitter. I love that you're using the hashtags. We've got podcasts. We've got chats. There's a lot of really exciting things showing up there. So, all right. I think it's starting to kind of slow down. So we'll switch over to our last slide. And I'd just like to take a moment to just thank you so much for tuning into our webinar today. Please reach out to me if you have any additional questions or comments. I mean, it's going to take a lot of work for us to work together to help foster this nurse-driven media momentum. And we're going to need to continue to be creative in how we can continue to cultivate these meaningful connections and relationships moving forward. So questions, comments, quibbles, here's how you reach me. Please reach out. There's my email. I've got 2 of them. I am active on Twitter, and I also have a Facebook account, PNP by the Sea, which is kind of my professional one where I used to disseminate any articles of interest specifically involving child health, which I think is something that in terms of Facebook is maybe worth pursuing in terms of having a professional and a personal one to be able to meet the needs of your nursing research advocacy environments, as well as have something more personal. So I'm not sure, it looks like it's 1 minute till 2 o'clock. So there's been a lot of amazing chat on the side. Does anyone have any last questions that they'd like to send out to me before we close?
Well, Dr. Westphal, we just want to make sure we say thank you for your presentation today. This was definitely very informative. We did receive a lot of comments and a very engaged audience, as you mentioned. With resources, a lot of people commented on the resources that you actually provided in your presentation. So we definitely have a lot of feedback. As you mentioned, we are running out of time. So we don't have time to really address any additional questions. We do thank you that you did address a few. There was only one question that I did mention actually though that came up regarding the certifications, the alphabet soup that you referenced earlier. Is it necessary to include that when you list these in your publishings or your bloggings, or does it confuse journalists? What would you say, or how would you recommend handling that?
I would say it's very important for us to show who we are and share the story. Our initials are an important part of who we are. We are all united by our RN, but we all have so many different and interesting, diverse roles and things that we do that I think that it's highly important for us to make sure that we do identify ourselves by our initials as nurses and being able to weave a story so journalists and the general public, they really know who we are and what we do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think that's a great point that you bring up. Really letting everyone know, you mentioned so many different areas of social media and it captures so many audiences. So that's a great point to really let everyone know that although we are united, as you mentioned, everyone is a nurse or an RN, there are so many different faculties and areas of interest within the area. On behalf of Jonas Nursing and Healthcare, Jonas Nursing and Veterans Healthcare, the signature program of Jonas Philanthropies, again, we thank you for your presentation today and your time. We thank you everyone for joining us today. This has been a great presentation. Remember, you can visit our media library at www.jonasphilanthropies.org to view the recording and get more information. Thank you all. All right, have a good day.